Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for our second class on canine body language. We're going to be doing a PowerPoint tonight. I'm going to be showing you the first half of it this week and the second half of it next week. Last week, if you remember, we started with tails being like tone of voice and using this, and this as our tail reactions. Tonight in the PowerPoint, I'm going to show you much greater detail along with pictures, which will allow you to really see close to in real life what we're going to be doing. I'm going to share the PowerPoint here. Just give me a second. And we'll put it in present mode. And there you go. So as I said, this is a comprehensive beginning to understanding a dog talking to us. Dogs talk to us all the time. We just don't really know. No one's ever taught us how to understand what they're saying. And I kind of think of dog body language like sign language. It's an unspoken language, but it is still clear communication that can be very comprehensive and complex. And certainly dogs' body language is very comprehensive and very, very complex. Far more so than in people, because we have words, and so we don't necessarily need our bodies to say anything, although we do tend to use them all the time when we're communicating. Dogs always use their bodies when they're communicating, and they can use different vocalizations, but their vocalizations are no comparison to our words. So we're going to take a good look at different parts of the body tonight. Again, we're going to do the first half. And one of the things I'm going to start with is a dog being relaxed, and then a dog getting less relaxed. And next week we'll get into dogs being reactive. And what you want to understand is that when a dog is reactive, that's not a bad thing. Reactive just means the dog is responding to a stimuli. It could be you coming home from work. They're very reactive. They're excited. Or when they see a squirrel when you're out on a walk and they, yank to the end of the leash, that's very reactive. That just means they want to go have fun and chase the squirrel. Not that the squirrel likes that, but the dog certainly doesn't see that as an inappropriate behavior, nor would they if it was a cat. We also see our dogs get reactive when they're scared. A door slams and they get frightened for just a second. Dogs also get reactive when they're becoming assertive and even aggressive. But I want you to remember that reactivity does not mean aggression. Reactivity means your dog is responding to a stimuli, and with that, its body language and emotional state will change. The first thing I always like to tell people is don't let your feelings misguide you. So my partner of the time loved bulldogs, and this was our first bulldog, Yoda. And people's reaction to Yoda was almost always, he's so ugly that he's cute. I'm not sure I felt that way, because for me, it's hard to look at bulldogs because the way humans have bred them don't allow them to communicate their feelings, because their faces are completely malformed, and their tails and their bodies are completely malformed. They don't have tails. And so they're completely unable to express the majority of body language that dogs express. Here are these guys. Kismet was, I believe, 75% Border Collie, 25% Golden Retriever. That's based on knowing the breeding farm in Vermont that he came from. The dogs were all taken away, and that's how I ended up adopting Kismet. Grace was my first Border Collie that I owned. And I want you to take a good look at her face here. We look at these pictures, and we can see, generally speaking, that they look, at least these two, look pretty happy and content. Yoda is probably looking and waiting for a treat, but his body wouldn't tell us much. And here you have a picture of a dog with its mouth closed, but still a very relatively relaxed face. Her eyes might be a little bit squinty, and that's because you can tell there's a lot of sun coming at her. Kismet here, mouth open, tongue out, eyes relaxed, his ears are up a little bit. Border Collies, unless they're prick-eared Border Collies, do not tend to have what I referred to last week as a normal or typical ear carriage or ear set. Again, just to remind you, the most common traditional ones are prick-eared dogs, and they are like, say, a German Shepherd or an Akita, a Shiba Inu. They have prick ears, and that's the way their ears become when they're full grown. And then you have lots of breeds that have floppy ears, like retrievers and hounds. Their ears tend to just lay flat to their head, rounded at the bottom. And so with those types of ears, it's fairly easy to read when they're being reactive or not, as opposed to when you have a dog with an atypical ear carriage. You need to learn that ear carriage, and then you know when the dog's being reactive, because its ears will move out of their normal position, and they do still then follow certain guidelines, which you'll see as we look at ears in our dogs. But we, again, have these emotional reactions when we look at dogs, and you just want to make sure that you let yourself see the dog. It's cute. Oh, I wouldn't own that dog, or that dog looks scary, or oh my God, that's the most adorable thing I've ever seen. I want to take it home. Then let that pass, and then start reading the dog so that you're really understanding what the dog's saying. You're not just responding to your emotional reaction. If you look at Grace here compared to the last picture, it's pretty easy to tell that she's stressed. By what? We might not know. I know a friend of mine borrowed my dogs for the day, and unbeknownst to me, took them to a photo shoot, and then gave me some pictures as a gift, which is just wonderful. And this is Grace and Brody here at the photo shoot. And I know that they're looking at a camera person, and Grace is probably terrified because Grace was terrified of people. Brody, on the other hand, was great with people, but really didn't like other dogs. And I learned a ton from them. And I can tell you that by the time I had their training as complete as I could get it, there could be a bunch of people moving around, a bunch of dogs running around, and these two could hold these perfect sit stays. They're not in this specific position, but out in the real world, they would go into what I call obedience mode when I needed them to be in a kind of contained or controlled position. When a dog is in that mode, obedience mode, you cannot read its body language as true emotion. So you may not come across it very often, but if you do come across a dog who's in a sit stay or a down stay, what you're seeing is not necessarily what the dog is feeling. A good example of this could be if you're walking down the sidewalk and a person's approaching you and their dog is at their side. You stop to chat. Their dog is holding a sit stay, and if you don't move near that dog, you have no idea if that dog is friendly or if that dog is terrified of you or might want to bite your hand because it's in a nice sit stay next to its owner. One thing to know about the difference between dog training, a dog being in a sit stay requires training, and a dog behaviorist, which is what I do, is that dog trainers use obedience to control negative or unwanted behaviors, as well as to promote wanted behaviors like not jumping on people or house training, so they'll eliminate outdoors. Just so you know, but what we do as behaviorists is we look at the dog's body language. We look at the dog's feelings, how that dog is feeling when it's reacting to a stimuli that bothers it. And we desensitize dogs so that their emotional state is more comfort with what was previously a very upsetting, in one way or another, stimuli can become a less stressful stimuli. And that's by looking at their emotional state, being able to read how they feel from what their bodies are telling us, and being able to work with those feelings, as well as obviously using training to control behaviors that would be unwanted. So Grace would have bitten someone given the opportunity, and I trained her not to by holding sit stays or down stays or coming to me when she was off leash, but I also worked on her comfort level so that she felt better and she wasn't as scared of people. So again, they're good these two are good examples of if they were in the presence of a stimuli they didn't like. Grace clearly doesn't like the camera person, but she's still holding that perfect sit stay. And therefore, you can't know for sure that she really wants to bite that camera person. I know because I was the one who trained her not to do things like that. And that's, anyone can do that. You guys can do that. It's what I teach people to do when I work with them. Here's a picture of a dog that's very relaxed. And the three primary things we're going to look at here are ears, mouth, and tongue. Ears, mouth, and tongue. And Wyatt did not have a traditional ear carriage, pricked or floppy, but this was his traditional ear carriage. So if his ears move out of this position, I know he's being reactive to someone. It's a little hard to see their eyes in both dogs. You can kind of see one eye. They're open, they're relatively round. It's hard to tell whether their pupils are dilated or not, but in general, you'll have a dog with round open eyes when they're relaxed. Their mouth will be open, their tongue will be extended over their bottom teeth. So again, here, mouth open, tongue extended over the bottom teeth. This is my first little dog that I owned, Wyatt. This was Moko, a dog who was staying with me at the time. Okay, so these are dogs in a very relaxed state. Here's a dog with a closed mouth, therefore tongue in the mouth, in a very relaxed state. And this is a common example of what our dogs might look like when they're just laying down, but they're not asleep. So a dog does not always have to have its mouth open or its tongue out to be relaxed, but normally they will have their mouth open and their tongue out if they're moving about. If they see something, if they hear something, they usually will not, their mouths will either be open and closed, which means something, or their mouths will be open. If you're walking, even if they're not hot, their mouths will be open. She had prick ears, Pixel did, and so this is normal for her. If you look, her eyes are open and wide and soft. There's no furrowing of the brow. There's no puffiness around her lips or anywhere else in the side of her face. So this is a dog, again, that is a very relaxed dog, even though mouth is closed. Panting dogs, just to point out the difference. When a dog is panting, yes, open mouth, tongue extended over the bottom teeth. Taya, open mouth, tongue extended over the bottom teeth. The things to look at here are the line down her tongue, the little pockets on either side here, the curling at the very edge of her tongue. So those are signs to look for in a dog that's actually panting as opposed to open mouth, tongue extended, relaxed. She's still totally relaxed, waiting for me to kick the ball again. But she is hot, and that's where you see the change in the structure or texture of the tongue. With Falcon here, it's very easy to see that he's hot. His tongue is swollen or engorged. You see a lot of extra, so to speak, tongue here between the teeth and the top of the tongue. If he wasn't sweating, the tongue would rest against or just inside of those teeth, and it's sticking way out. It's got some curled there on the side and a little bit of tucked under there, and it's red. So a lot of people know, how do you know the dog's not just panting because it's hot? These are what panting tongues look like in hot dogs. And one of the reasons their tongues change colors and get engorged is because the dogs can only sweat through their tongues and the pads of their feet. So by enlarging their tongues, they allow more surface area, and therefore they allow it allows them to sweat more and keep and maintain their body temperature. Okay, so we think back to the previous picture before Pixel and before panting. We talked about open mouth, tongue extended. And so while Tango's tongue here is off to the side, it's mostly because he's tipping his head up. If his head was not tipped up, his tongue would be hanging out over his teeth, and it would be hanging out further than what you see here. So if you notice too, his eyes are mostly round. His ears are kind of flipped up because he is looking up. You're beginning to see a little bit of puffiness here. We'll get into that more. And his eyes aren't quite as round as they could be. So he is pretty relaxed here. I still would, if I saw this, I'd say, yeah, that dog's relaxed. And as you see here, you're starting to see signs of stress or decreased relaxation. His head is not tipped up anymore, but his ears, again, were atypical. Tango was a pit bull that I did what's called foster to rehabilitate. So I had him for several months. He had been pulled from a fighting ring, and I rehabilitated him, and then he was able to be placed in a wonderful home. So he's not completely stressed out. His mouth is still open. His tongue is still extended. But as you can see here, it's getting pretty close to being able to see that lower lip. You're seeing it on the sides. You're not seeing any teeth here. His mouth is starting to close. It's not open as wide as it is here, and his eyes are beginning to get a little squinty. All signs of some stress coming on. Do I know precisely what? No. I know from this picture that we were outside somewhere, and I'm guessing this was taken shortly afterwards. Honestly, I cannot tell you the specifics, but something is causing that reactivity. He is actually standing in the water. That looks like the pond we take them to. So still mostly relaxed, but not 100% relaxed. Again, mostly relaxed, but less relaxed than Tango. So before I talk about anticipatory behavior, what I want you to notice is Penny's mouth is almost closed, and you can see her entire lip, and you can see her teeth right there. Okay, so what we are having is a slightly open mouth, tongue retracted. The tongue is becoming retracted more so than the last picture, and it's retracted enough that we can see her bottom teeth. Her ears are perked up. Penny was a hound mix, and her ears were mostly flat. They were sometimes up a little bit right here and here, but she's pulling them up and forward. So she's less relaxed or slightly reactive, but not necessarily in a negative way. And again, looking at mouths and eyes, her eyes are getting a little squinty. She had big round hound eyes. And right here, they're getting a little squinty, and you're starting to see a little puffiness here. You're not seeing any puffiness here, which we saw in Tango. Jig's here, clearly mouth is open, but not wide open, tongue retracted, and you can very clearly see his bottom teeth here. His eyes are still soft. There's no wrinkling in the forehead. There's no puffiness around the mouth. His ears are not that far from what was typical for him, but slightly pulled back, especially on this one, a little bit on this one, not quite as much. Anticipatory behavior. That's what you get when you get that cocked head. And normally anticipatory behaviors are for something good. Not always, they can anticipate fear, but when you tend to get that cocked head, they're anticipating something. It could be about to throw a ball, it could be a treat, it could be they're wondering if you're going to feed them dinner, they're going for a car ride, you stop the car, they cock their head to see, ooh, are we here? Is this where we're going to go for a hike? So anticipatory behavior is that cocked head. Again, we're still reading the rest of their behavior. So you're seeing some different things. Why would a dog be getting less stressed if it's anticipating something good? Well, who knows? Maybe Jigs is waiting for the ball and there's another dog nearby that's going to steal the ball. And here is Penny. Maybe she's anticipating a treat, but she's questioning whether or not she's going to get that treat. Again, you can only know if you're there, and then what you would look at is cause and effect. My dog wasn't cocking its head. I touched my treat pouch, head cocks, dog's anticipating will it get a treat or not. So again, separating the two things, mouths are closing, tongue is retracting, ears slightly pulled up or out. Here we see even less relaxation. This is Kobe, he was my first Shiloh, and Jigs again. So if we think back to the previous picture, you can tell his ears sticking out more. And if you're wondering if him being wet is making a difference, if it were, the ear would be flatter to the head, not sticking out more. And here, this ear as well is less descriptive, partly because he's wet, but also because he's flattening this top edge and sticking the entire ear further out to the side. So coming out this way from this way to out to the side of the head. And again, you're seeing retracted tongue, a little bit wide, but I wouldn't put too much weight in that. What I really am looking at is his mouth is not fully opened, his tongue are clearly showing, and there's almost a space right there between his tongue and his teeth. Here, you can see that space. So we have a further retracted tongue where you can actually see the space between the teeth and between the tongue. When you start to see that, you know your dog is even further reactive or much less relaxed than in the beginning. Remember, we're looking at gradations of behavior, not extreme sudden changes in behavior. Kobe had prick ears, and he is turning them slightly out to the side. Again, that's a shift from relaxed, normal ear carriage, to out to the side, less relaxed. Here you can definitely tell that Jig's eyes are not open, soft, and wide, whereas while he has a further retracted tongue, his eyes are still fairly round and open and expressive like normal. This one being a little bit more closed. So again, you're looking at minimal changes, but yet with the mouth, from the very beginning where the tongue was hanging out and we couldn't see any of the bottom lip, now we're seeing that space under the tongue, further an extended or further decrease in relaxation. So we have normal, relaxed tail carriages. And while I talked about last week, the tongue being parallel to the ground, more traditionally, you're going to get a tail like this. This is a Rottweiler with a tail. This is a Nova Scotia duck-tolling retriever whose tail, it doesn't carry as low. This is also a common golden retriever tail carriage. And this is what's called a smooth-coated collie. So it's a collie without all the fur. And this is its normal tail carriage. So they're not technically precisely parallel stuck out straight to the ground. If they were, that would actually be reactivity. I use that in the first week as a way to give you guys the simplest explanation and the beginnings of what to look for. So these are all tails that are relaxed. There's changes in his face. He looks like he's panting. He's also in a stacked position. So here's a good opportunity to show you the box we talked about. We still have that straight up to the neck, straight across the top line, and we would be straight down. Dogs that perform in the show ring they're taught to hold what's called a stacked position, which is what the owner wants when it's in the ring competing with the dog. And when dogs are stacked, they tend to stick their back legs out, versus this dog is still in that perfect box and its legs are straight up and down. This collie, my guess is this leg is sticking back from its movement. But if we look at this leg, we have a straight line here, across the top, and certainly down the front. Collies' ears are normally, they put sticky tacky stuff or chewing gum at the tips of collies' ears, also Shelties, Bulldogs, some other breeds, to make them have a floppy effect at the end. That doesn't come naturally. Fortunately, it's not as bad as, say, cutting ears, as is done with traditionally with Dobermans, less so now with Pit Bulls and Great Danes, but there are other breeds that they do that with. And in that case, they actually cut half the ear off, and then they put sticks in them and tape the two sticks together with a space between them. And that's what turns those dogs' ears into prick ears. They're actually, if you look at a Doberman with floppy ears and a tail, which is how they're born, they kind of resemble more hound dogs than they do Dobermans. These dogs all have their natural ears. Again, this dog, its ears didn't tip down as much as was probably desired, but you still see some slight tipping. It is also possible that this is this collie's natural ears and nobody did anything, and they on their own have some slight tipping to them. You can disregard this. This is an obedience dumbbell, so this dog is being trained to compete in obedience. This is what's referred to as a bumper, and it's used to often train water retrieving dogs. And that's what this dog looks like it was being trained for. Then we have, like I talked about, ears being the shape and either cropped or gum put at the end of them, cropping being far worse. We get docked tails. Australian Shepherds are often born without tails. This does not look like a cropped tail. This is Mookie. Mookie definitely has a cropped tail, and that tail is very hard to read. Mookie lived with me for 2 years and then went to an amazing, amazing, amazing home, what I call the best of dog owners. And with her little stub, she could push it against her butt, and she could also wag it back and forth really fast. And those are really the only two things we could read from her tail. But in general, what I tell people is if you're looking at a dog with a docked tail, or like this with no tail, you cannot read what that tail is saying. In a dog like an Aussie, you'll see its whole back end wiggle and wag, but without the tail, you can't do any of the tail readings we talked about and we're gonna talk about. The rest of their, this dog's face is still perfectly natural, so you could read all the other things. Its body shape, again, its body shape allows for that square, but forget reading this. You just leave it out of the package. Dogs were never meant to have curly tails like this. Dogs were descended from wolves and should still carry the tails you see up here. Pugs were bred to have these tight curly tails, as were many other breeds, but it is not a natural tail carriage like ear carriage. So there are some basic things that I as a human, you as a human can read in this tail. One is it can move it back and forth very rapidly. And so that would indicate reactivity, a fast moving tail. And this dog can unfurl its tail, but will only do so when it's very scared. So if you remember the picture of the puppy, you can get this tail to unfurl and tuck all the way underneath to the belly, but you won't see any variability in between. You might see a slight bit, but in general, you're either going to see it like this or completely tucked under. And the tucked under would mean something, the fast movement would mean something, but nothing in between. And what's even more of an issue, it's not so much us reading the dog because we can read the rest of its body, but other dogs can't go, huh, that dog has a docked tail, or oh, humans bred that dog to have a curly tail. And therefore, when a dog is trying to understand what another dog is saying, which is done instinctually and it does not carry the thought process humans use, that dog, so if you take, say, this Rottie here, if it was trying to read this pug, it would read the tail as something other than what the pug is probably expressing, because the tail is not doing what a normal tail should do, and its tail can't, but the Rottweiler would have absolutely no way to understand that. Therefore, that causes miscommunication, as does the smushed face. The dog cannot open and close its mouth properly. It can't use its tongue properly. These folds come naturally, and there's all these folds you can't see here on the side of the face, but you saw in my Bulldog Yoda. But another dog can't go, oh, that's what humans did in breeding this dog. They just think the dog's got its mouth slammed shut, it's got no nose, it's got no tongue, and it's got all these furrows. And those furrows mean decreased relaxation. So me looking at that pug, I would say, yeah, that pug looks very relaxed. A dog reading that pug would think that it was not at all relaxed because its tail's up in the air and its eyes are going to be squinty or closed, and it's got all these folds in the face. And we'll have some other slides more so next week that show what that puffiness in the face means. With pugs, that could be a natural ear carriage. Again, when you have these dogs I was talking about with all these unnatural ear carriages like border collies, even though border collies were not bred to have atypical ear carriages, Wyatt, my little black terrier mix, he wasn't bred to have that ear carriage, but still it can be cause for miscommunication in other dogs because that other dog has no way of knowing that that dog was bred to look that way. Okay, now we're moving into reactivity. All right, we'll start with mouths first. Freya here is a puppy. She's probably about 4 or 5 months old in this picture, and her mouth is almost closed and her tongue is nowhere to be seen. Lentil here, my third little, I adopted May of 2019. His mouth is closed, no tongue to be seen. And therefore, we know we're getting reactivity in these clamped mouths. I'll get to Ziggy, the Newfoundland, next. Freya, we're starting to see that tail, if you can tell, is straight out, so there's no little curl at the end, like you would see if it was down low. And also, it's coming above the parallel line. So it's gone from like this to flat and slightly up. So that's definite increased reactivity. Even 8-week-old, 6-week-old puppies show all these communication skills. Actually, if you get a puppy, when you first get that puppy, all of its body language is as normal as it can be. When dogs lack the opportunity to continue to communicate and interact with other dogs, they will lose their language. Just like if you learned a second language when you were younger, say you were in high school and now you're in your 50s, the likelihood is you remember next to nothing or nothing of that language you learned unless you continue to use it. Dogs are no different. If they're given the opportunity to only play with 1 or 2 other dogs, particularly in the first 4 months of life, they will automatically begin to lose their communication skills. In general, we will still be able to read their body language because it's instinctual, it's genetic, they're born with it, and therefore it will always remain. It may not be quite as refined, mostly with other dogs. With humans, it will still stay the same, whether we can tell, whether we know what they're saying or not. Lentil came with this little bobtail here. I think of him as like a little Peter Cottontail. It's very hard to read. It's even less, you can't read it even as easily as Mookie, who had the little tight stub tail. His tail, it's so mushed in with his fur, you can't even see the tail itself. And I take very little stock in what his tail does because it almost always looks like that. He has an atypical ear carriage, but I can tell they're up, both of them, because then he's relaxed, they're further against his head. They're not floppy, but they're further against his head. If he were standing to his side, it would be easier to see, but his front legs are sticking out, and his body is somewhat retracted. So he's pulling back here, and he's sticking his legs out here. He is out of the box, and that means more reactivity. But you can also see this excitement and anticipation just in the way he's looking at Freya and moving forward. It's a little harder to describe for me to say he's excited because it is harder to break down some of those details, but his head is moving forward. His eyes are still round and soft. His mouth is closed because he's not totally relaxed, but again, he's excited. Reactivity doesn't mean negativity. Freya has normal prick ears. She's a Siberian Husky, or excuse me, an Alaskan Husky. She's one of the two. And she has normal prick ears, even at this age. And this ear is pulled back. This ear is pulled back, but it's very hard to tell for me if that's actually her ear or not, because that would be very odd that it would flip all the way over. But it's certainly not sticking straight up from her head. If he had prick ears, you know, it's not sticking straight up. It's not sticking straight up like this one. And the way you can like look way down that canal and you see all of this side of the ear, it's not up and forward like it should be. And you can barely see a tooth, but for the most part, she's looking at Lentil. She has blue eyes and a very intense wolfy looking face. So she always has somewhat of an intense expression. Again, that's my or human's interpretation and a feeling. So we do have to just break down the body parts. She has blue eyes. Blue eyes are very hard to read. You can only look at whether they're round or squinty or starting to close. You can't tell as much. You can also look at whether the pupils are dilated, but it's much harder to read softness or hard stare in dogs with blue eyes. So Lentil wants to play. Freya's considering it. She's certainly not turning away, but she's a little more hesitant than he is. And you can tell, even though that leg is sticking out and her head's looking at him, she's not as like excited and uppity and moving into Lentil's face like, yeah, I want to play, where the dogs get erect and their heads tend to move forward more than from their body. Here we look at Ziggy. So this is, I have this 1 acre yard, so the dogs that stay in our home, as well as my dogs, get to go out and play in it. Back up behind Ziggy is all wooded. The fence line's way back up in the woods. And then this is a little stream that runs through the yard, and then there's some brush. And then as we would move to Ziggy's right or our left, goes out into a gigantic lawn, grassy area where they can run. So we can look at the stick and say Ziggy was trotting down the stream and stop because of a stick. But in reality, Ziggy was trotting down the stream and he saw Falcon right here. If you can just see him in the edge of the picture. And what happened was his normally lowered tail has come up. And you can see it's kind of similar to Freya's, but it's got a little tip up there at the end. And also his ears are coming forward. Even though he's black, you can see his eyes are starting to squint. And his mouth is definitely closed, and it's a little off center, which means the end of his muzzle is, which means he's sniffing. And so my guess is he's just trotting along, happy as can be. You know, Ziggy, of course, loves to be in the water. See another dog, stops, checking it out, reacting. Tail coming up, mouth closed, ears coming forward, little bit of furrowing in the brow, and a little puffiness there from the squinty eyes. Again, we're looking at increased reactivity. These guys play all the time. It's rare that big dogs get a chance to play with other big dogs. And in this case, they play all the time together. So it's not a negative reactivity. It could have just been a startle response. Or it could have been, ooh, it's Falcon. Is he going to play with me? Again, cause and effect. it would be what happened after this picture that would say to me what, what happens next can probably also tell me what reaction was Ziggy having. And especially we can't read Falcon at all, so we don't know anything aside from the fact that Falcon's side is to Ziggy and Falcon's face would be towards us, and Ziggy can see his face, but obviously we can't. But they do get along really well, so my guess would just be excitement. Here we have very reactive tails. Like I said, we're going to get mostly into reactivity next week, but all three of these tails, Jenny, McKenna, and I'm very sorry, but I forget this German Shepherd's name. I do know it's a intact male dog, neutered male dog, spayed female, but this is intense reactivity. By the way, this here is the little stream that Ziggy was just coming down that we saw. That's the woods behind the stream and the grass in my yard. Big, great yard for dogs to play in, which I love because it gives me so much opportunity to watch them. It's like watching television for me. I can stand and stare out into the yard forever. So we'll go back to Jenny here. Jenny now, you can see very squinty eyes. I believe the slide for that we'll get into next week more. She had hound ears, so she's moving them all funny and pulling them back. Right here, you can see what are called the commissure, puffing out. We'll talk more again, I believe again next week. I don't remember exactly where the cutoff is for the first half, I apologize. Tail up and starting to go over her back. All signs of reactivity, mouth clamped shut, tongue nowhere to be seen. This eye's open a little more, but still squinty. You can still see puffiness here. But we're not seeing anything severe except the tails. All three of these tails are very reactive. They can tip all the way over the back, but this is often as reactive as these tails might get, even though they could go over. It's not common for a dog to put its tip of its tail all the way on its back. So these are reactive, and if, like it says, they would be moving very, very quickly. Short distances, not big, wide, waggy tails, but very, very tight tails like you would see in something stiff moving in the wind. You can also just barely see McKenna's hackles up right here. We talked about hackles last week being a sign of mixed emotions, and his hackles up here. It used to be said many years ago, we believed that if the hackles were up here, the dog was being aggressive. And if the hackles were up back here, the dog was scared. And if they were up all the way, we weren't sure. Now, after many, 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 many more years of research, what we know for sure is that regardless of how much of the hackles are raised or where they are raised, it just means the dog is having mixed emotions. So McKenna is still in that box, aside from the hackles, but he's got his mouth clamped shut. And his ears, he had very floppy ears, so his ear, you can tell, is pulled back a little bit. If you can tell, you might get a general impression of stress in his face, which is correct. This dog, you can't see the back of his neck, but his neck is up and arched over with his nose pushing at McKenna's back. If you're familiar with horses, horses will also often show that arched neck. And in dogs, that's being assertive. So this dog here is becoming very assertive, and its tail tip is further over its back than Jenny or McKenna. And you can see its ears kind of coming forward and turning out to the side at the same time. Very squinted eyes. You're starting to get some wrinkled nose right there. So this dog is moving toward aggression, being very assertive. It's not being aggressive, but it's showing signs, beginning signs of what could become aggressive behavior. McKenna isn't running away. He's standing his ground, but he's clearly avoiding eye contact. And you can see, like I said, some overall stress or fear. That doesn't mean that he's not getting real reactive about it. He's just nervous, but not to the point of showing submissive or very deferential or yielding behaviors. So you get three different expressions in the faces, differences in the ears, and identical tails. So that's why, again, why it's so important to look at every body part to know what what's really going on in this picture. We're going to talk on our last couple of slides about mixed emotions, and that's where we're going to end tonight. And I particularly love this picture. There's Lentil, as you see, and you can see his ears are, in general, this is his normal ear carriage. They flip over at the end, so they're floppy but out to the side. And this one is as well. This is pretty normal for him. This is Lentil looking alert but relaxed. It's Caper that has the mixed emotions. So Caper's in this picture about a year old. He's a tricolor border collie, and I call this his sassy face. He's just got this very sassy expression right here. This side of his face is still relaxed. His entire body is relaxed, but his leg, he's pulling his leg off to the side. We'll talk more about paw gestures next week. He's got his ear turning out, and you can see a little bit of the whites of the eyes showing. And sometimes that can mean a dog's about to bite. In this case, it doesn't mean that. It's just sort of a, why are you here? What do you want? Or I was trying to sleep. Why'd you turn the light on? I just call this a sassy face. This is Sophie, a dog who boards with me a lot, and I can tell for all my students, based on the fact that this is pavement, that Sophie is being dropped off or picked up at UVM, either to come and stay with me or getting picked up by her owner to go home. It's a convenient spot that is closer for many owners than where I live out in Hanksville, southern and Huntington, Vermont. So what mixed emotions are we seeing? Sophie came to me by choice. I did not pull her in, and you can see, if you look at everything but her face, her body is relaxed. You can tell there's no straining in her body to come toward me. She's giving me her foot, which is an appeasement gesture. We'll talk more about appeasement gestures next week. She's not doing like the shake or paw cue that we often teach our dogs. You can see here there's worry in her face. Her eyes are fairly round, but all this puffiness here and her ears pulled back. She's a little worried. I'm guessing that her owner is standing over here next to me, and maybe she's looking at her owner. She's got her tongue, she has a black and pink tongue. That's actually, I believe, the black part of her tongue, but it could be the space behind her teeth showing. Either way, you've got a retracted tongue, a mouth that's about halfway closed, teeth are showing here. So this part of us is showing us, I'm not relaxed. Her face is saying that. Her body and her paw up here is that saying, and her tail being on the ground like that, as opposed to sticking up. We could see it sticking off the ground. So her entire body but her head is saying, I'm relaxed, and her face is saying, I'm a little unsure or I'm a little stressed. Here's some more mixed emotions. Here's Wyatt and Yoda, both my dogs I had at the same time. And what are we seeing here? In Yoda, we're really not seeing a lot of mixed emotions. He's got his eyes squinted closed, his ears pulled back, his hackles are raised, his tail is down, he's turning away. This paw is not, as I referred to, an appeasement gesture. I will shoot over here. This paw is an appeasement gesture, and it's doing exactly what it means. She is trying to appease the golden retriever here. But we'll come back to here. This is a dog lifting his leg to turn away, and you can tell that by the whole curve of his body. The mixed emotions we're seeing are more in Wyatt. He's doing a tongue flick, which we'll talk about next week, is a stress behavior. He was getting cataracts and beginning to lose his vision, so it's a little hard to tell by that they look hard when they could be soft, but they're still open. They're not squinty. His eyes, he had big round eyes. His eyes are definitely squinty. Wyatt's tail is up and touching the back of his back. That could be also partly because he's got the long fur. In the previous picture, all the dogs had very little fur, so to speak, on their tails, but his tail is up and over his back, but his ears are still pretty relaxed. He's not really pushing into Yoda. He doesn't have his whole front of his body turned this way. We'll talk about that here. But you can still tell these guys live together. That doesn't mean that they don't get in disagreements or have mixed feelings about each other. We actually tend as humans to show a much wider range of emotions with the people we're closest with. Dogs, they'll show the same emotions regardless, just depending on the situation. But they're not affected necessarily by whether or not they live with that dog. They would show more emotion based on the fact that they have more interaction. So again, Yoda, he's just saying, excuse me, I'd like to get away from you because you're being pushy and bossy. How do I know why it's being pushy and bossy? Because Yoda's telling me he is. So that's a good way, another good way to recognize that you can read dogs. I can tell from his stature that it's the cause and effect is Wyatt's the cause. The effect is Yoda wanting to go away. We've got stress here, but still Wyatt is clearly indicating to Yoda, get out of here. If I were maybe 2 pictures later, my guess is that Wyatt's body would be more arched, his head would be closer to Yoda's, and he would be more physically pushing Yoda out of his own space. This is a Trooper when he was 4 months old. This was his natural tail, and we're just going to ignore Trooper for a minute, aside from the fact that he's an adorable Leonberger mix, was my guess. This is about a 7 to 8 month old Border Collie, 7 to 8 month old Golden Retriever. So you can see in almost all of the Border Collie, we've still got the box for the most part. So again, not too bent out of shape, not too stressed or unrelaxed, but her tail's coming up and off to the side. So up, reactivity, off to the side, less reactivity. Ears up, which is not, most Border Collies will carry their ears lower. You can see open mouth, tongue extended. So that's all showing. So the open mouth, tongue extended, body shape, appeasement gesture are all not necessarily relaxed, but at least not the relaxed to non-reactive states. Her tail's showing reactivity, her ears are showing reactivity, her mouth is showing relaxation. The overall thing I want you to notice here is she is pushing her body into the Golden in the same sense that Wyatt is pushing his body towards Yoda. So this frontal, stretched out, head close to the Golden is all what's causing this Golden to show many submissive body postures. If you think about the line drawings last week, we saw a picture very similar to this. The tail, my guess, is probably underneath, between her legs. But you can see she has got her body retracted towards Trooper. Her paws are spread. If you can ignore her head for a minute, her whole body is showing deference, yielding behaviors towards the Border Collie. What's very interesting is she is staring straight into the Border Collie's eyes. Her eyes are squinty, her mouth is closed, and she is staring straight at her saying, stop, don't move forward. While the entire rest of her body is yielding and deferential, saying, you can do whatever you want, you can come near me. So this is, I just love this picture in the fact that we're seeing such a difference in this Golden's body, with her head being reactive, saying stay away, and the entire rest of her body saying, I'm a puppy, I submit, I give, uncle, whatever you want's okay. Fortunately, there's absolutely no assertiveness or aggression to speak at all. I mean, there's a little bit of assertiveness in the facial direction, but not enough to call it an assertive behavior. Okay, folks, guess what? We show mixed emotions too. And it's no different. You know, why do dogs show mixed emotions? Because they're dogs. Why do people show mixed emotions? Because they're people. I often like to point to politicians because I find it amusing how this is supposed to be a smile and this is supposed to be a smile. And there is no way any of these guys are feeling like smiling. If they were not taught to keep their hands, palms open, hands at sides, they'd have their arms folded across their chests, which is more how their bodies are saying they feel. They're very stiff. In dogs, we call this freezing. But this is just, you've got these like squinty eyes, you've got the folds in the face, just like in a dog, right? And you've got this grimace that is supposed to be a smile. In looking for just a good facial shot of mixed emotions, I had a very hard time. I don't take pictures of humans. So this is off the internet, and I wish I could get rid of the sticker that's on her forehead, so I just ask you to ignore that. But if you look at the bottom half of her face, pretty much anything underneath her eyes, her skin is very smooth. She doesn't have any puffiness here. Again, look at the politicians. Puffiness, puffiness. You can even see it here, and you can see it a little bit here and in the chin and under the lip. She has a very nice, smooth, relaxed, smiling type face. And then the eyes, again, a completely different behavior, completely like similar in a sense to what I call Caper's fancy, sassy face. So Caper has that sassy face kind of in that look. I know that nowadays this, I believe in humans on the internet, is called side eyes. I apologize that one, I am rarely on the internet looking at things, and I am no longer a 20-something, and my guess is one of my college students could much better give you much better description of her facial expression, especially the eyes, than I can. But a clear difference to anybody in those eyes and in the rest of this, you know, nice, relaxed smile and skin and so on. The reason I have this picture here of Lie to Me, Lie to Me was a TV show that had 3 seasons, and it was based on a scientist who, in his work, learned to break down and read facial expressions the way I read dogs' body language. And again, the reason I put it in here is that I found this to be very helpful, even though this came years after I had been speaking dog. It still was a really good way to just look at how another species body can get broken down, or gestures, facial expressions can be broken down and into what they mean. So in a sense, it can be a learning guide in how to look at any species, dog, human, elephant, octopus, etc., and learn how to read specific different signs in humans. I don't know if it's streaming anymore on one of the channels that streams, and you may not be interested, but like I said, I include it because I think it's helpful in teaching a human how to read body language regardless of the species. And so we end the first half of the PowerPoint, and next week I'll bring you the second half. I certainly hope you enjoy this. I will introduce our stars of the show, because it's the dogs that everybody gets excited about, not me, which is the way it should be. This is sweet, sweet Haley, very elderly lab. And this is my little Lentil. And this is Meg, adorable little toy poodle that we board for, fortunately, often a month or 2 in the winter while her owner travels overseas. And Lentil and Meg are very good friends. And this is my dining room, actually. So I hope you've enjoyed the first half of the body language PowerPoint, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me those questions. If you're a UVM student, it's jamie.shaw@uvm.edu. Anybody can email me there. If you're a dog school client, you can email us at info@thedogschoolvt.com. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.